A few days ago, over 150 academics and writers, several of whom are wealthy public figures with large platforms, signed an open letter that was published in Harper's Magazine entitled "A Letter on Justice and Debate." The crux of the letter was the assertion that society, and implicitly the left, has become more intolerant of opposing views, and increased calls for silencing of speech is a threat to the free exchange of ideas, which is the lifeblood of Wait, haven't we been through this a million times already? Hi, I'm T1J.
Follow me.
Now, while the letter didn't specifically use the term cancel culture, it's pretty clear that this is the idea they were getting at. The by now trite insistence that free expression will be or already is hindered by the fear of being canceled. And this letter made some waves on the internet over the past week, but this isn't new, obviously. I'm pretty sure roughly every month for the past 5 years, I've seen at least one article or video or something complaining about cancel culture or pondering whether online public shaming has gone too far. And I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler. Just like everything else, it's heckin' complicated. Sometimes people do go too far, but also sometimes people who do shitty things ought to be called out. Sometimes the most correct ideas are unpopular, and society should provide space for people to express those ideas without excessive retribution. But also, it's good for people to think before they speak and to consider the impact of their words and actions, and I fully support a society that encourages that. But this is kind of an annoying conversation for several other reasons as well. For one, I'm not even sure what cancel culture really is, or what it even means to be canceled. Some people describe canceling as essentially a boycott. So someone says or does something shitty, and they become canceled, and you decide you're not going to support them anymore. And this is fair. You don't have to support anyone you don't want to. As much as I love the Space Jam soundtrack, R. Kelly gives me the creeps. The Bugs Bunny rap still goes hard though. But if this was all canceling was, why would people complain so much about censorship and silencing? Boycotts don't silence or shame anyone. I suppose with enough organizing and support you could harm them financially. But that's fair game because no one has a right to an audience or to a customer. And I actually think that the idea of canceling someone may have actually started out this way, but it seems to have evolved over time. These days it seems like we're using the word cancel as a more literal reference to the idea of a canceled credit card or a canceled TV show. RIP, My Name is Earl, gone too soon. So basically something that's over, it doesn't exist anymore. So if we take this metaphor to one logical conclusion, this might imply that canceling someone means to attempt to banish them from the public eye, or maybe to make it so that they can't work anymore or something to that effect. To make it so that they're over, they don't exist anymore. In practice though, I can't think of very many times where a public figure has been successfully canceled under this definition. As of the making of this video, the most recent famous person that I know of that was supposedly canceled is J.K. Rowling, who posted a string of tweets which seem ignorant at best and callously transphobic at worst. But I mean, she's still here, she's still tweeting, she still seems to be beloved by children and parents. She has a book coming out in November. She definitely has not been silenced in any way. Now, it might be possible that J.K. Rowling is so particularly famous that she is uncancelable outside of committing some sort of violent crime. But when it comes to celebrities and public figures of any renown, this is kind of what usually happens, unless they willingly stay out of the spotlight even though they don't really have to. Like sometimes someone gets accused of or caught doing or saying something perceived as bad, and they might even lose a gig, like when the comedian Shane Gillis was fired from SNL after offensive jokes he made surfaced online. One might even lose some friends and supporters, but ultimately they seem fine. Like Gillis, they keep working, they keep their platform. I mean, outside of the ordeal of an internet dogpile, which I know from experience is unpleasant, but the word canceled doesn't seem to really describe the situation. So either cancel culture is really bad at actually canceling people, or canceling means something other than what it sounds like it should mean. Now, some people say that cancel culture isn't really a thing, and I do think that sometimes these free speech warriors like to cherry pick examples of left-wing lunacy to discredit legitimate activism and criticism. And as I mentioned, famous people and public figures seem, by and large, to be uncancelable. This is often presented as evidence of the myth of cancel culture, as it seems the people most likely to complain about it are people who could never be canceled in the first place. But if you're seriously arguing that people on the internet don't ever try in large numbers to cancel people, that is, attempt to make them irrelevant, dogpile them into hiding, cause them to lose jobs, or pressure their friends and business partners to disassociate with them, you're either misinformed or being disingenuous. Whether or not you think it's justified, it obviously happens, especially on Twitter. And trust me, I have to remind myself every day that the atmosphere on Twitter doesn't accurately represent the world as it is when I'm not looking at a screen. Seriously, y'all, log off and go look at a sunset or something every now and then. But Twitter, unfortunately, is where a lot of our cultural discourse takes place. It also happens to be perhaps the most convenient way for the average person to engage with and talk about celebrities and public figures. And just because the cancel culture is generally ineffective when it comes to canceling famous people, it doesn't mean they don't try. And it doesn't mean that it's not bad that they do try. Like, have you ever been on Twitter before? In reality, cancel culture is a Frankenstein term that is used as a surrogate for several distinct ideas. And that's precisely why it's a bad term, because no one knows what the fuck anybody is talking about at any given time. Sometimes the term is used to downplay legitimate criticism. A lot of the people who go on about free speech seem to have this idea that they should be able to say whatever they want with no consequences, and pretend that the mere concept of being criticized is tantamount to censorship. I talked about this a lot in my Sam Harris video, where I pointed out how Harris had a habit of accusing everyone who criticized him of being dishonest agents out to diminish his reputation. Cancel culture is also sometimes used interchangeably with the term mob mentality, the idea that large groups of people can influence each other to behave emotionally and irrationally. And this is also where the idea of dogpiling comes in, where hundreds or thousands of people go in on someone for some perceived wrongdoing. After a certain point, it just becomes harassment. I think it's more accurate to say that cancel culture can be a mob mentality. It's also important to note that legitimate criticism and mob mentality are not mutually exclusive. It's fair to criticize someone, but 20,000 people yelling the same criticism at that person, you can make an argument for that being essentially bullying. People also conflate cancel culture with call-out culture, which I'll use interchangeably with outrage culture for the purposes of this video, even though you could probably make further distinctions. This is similar to legitimate criticism. However, in this case, the point is to attack and shame people rather than educate or advise them. Because of the nature of social media and how algorithms reward outrage, I'd argue that this type of engagement is far more common online than legitimate criticism. And it's not just social media. Media in general these days seems to encourage us to be intolerant of people with different opinions than ourselves, to think of ourselves as enlightened and complex, but never giving others the same courtesy. I'm not saying you have to be friends with everyone, but we make fewer and fewer attempts to try and understand each other as complex beings. We just stamp canceled on people the first time they do or say something we find a little off-putting. We don't give people room to make mistakes or room to evolve and grow into better people. Once you've got the stamp, you're done, son. Some people use the excuse that celebrities are rich and powerful, so it doesn't matter if random people on the internet abuse them, because they're gonna be alright. Well, maybe, but they're still people. Another problematic aspect of outrage culture is the idea that it is okay to be hateful and uncharitable to people with more power than yourself. It's kind of a perversion of the concept of punching up, an assertion that criticism and rhetoric should be focused in opposition to those with power rather than those who are marginalized. I have some issues with this concept in and of itself, but we can talk about that another time. But I think even if you're gonna punch up, you still don't get to treat people with cruelty and pretend as if they're not people with depth and feelings. So obviously I would say that's bad, but you know what it isn't? It isn't censorship. It isn't silencing. If we're gonna use the term cancel culture, then it should refer specifically to attempts at removing or limiting someone's voice, resources, or platform, which again, people do try to do. And sometimes it kind of works, usually in cases of severe crimes that are impossible to ignore. Like, I'm sure Kevin Spacey is financially fine, but we haven't heard from him in a while. His reputation and influence is probably permanently damaged. But in general, it's hard, if not impossible, to actually apply any long-term effects when we're talking about celebrities and public figures. But not everybody who is a target of cancel culture is a celebrity. Everyday people find themselves the target of the internet's rage all the time. People are doxxed and harassed, employers are pressured to fire people, universities are asked to expel or punish students. And I suspect that one of the main responses will be something to the effect of, yeah, well, they deserve it. Well, first of all, sometimes they don't. Like David Shore, who was ominously asked by a follower, are people trying to cancel you? After he shared a study which suggested that riots make it more likely for Republicans to win elections. He posted it 3 days after the death of George Floyd, which was probably tone deaf, but it was hardly a reason to be fired from his job. But that's exactly what happened after political organizer Ari Trujillo Wessler took offense to his tweet and tagged his boss in the thread. But even if people are guilty of some transgression, the idea that they deserve it makes it sound like this whole thing is more about vengeance than actually making the world a better place. And vengeance is stupid. It provides a small burst of gratification, sure, but in the end, no one's actually happier and no one learned anything. The world didn't become better as a result. Especially when we consider the fact that a good portion of the people who get quote-unquote canceled are people who simply made a mistake or mean no obvious harm to anyone, and perhaps would be open to learning and growing if they were approached with compassion. I'm all for challenging power structures and attempting to increase accountability for people who rarely see consequences for anything they do. And I also understand that we are all exhausted and angry at a society whose unjust systems aren't being dismantled quickly enough. And some people are voluntarily and intentionally in the business of using their privilege to hurt people. And while even in those cases I'm still no fan of vengeance, I do think it's important for society to be intolerant of that kind of behavior. But most people are just living their lives the best way they know how. Sometimes they're uninformed, sometimes they have bad ideas, sometimes they make mistakes. But if all we have to offer as a solution is vengeful retaliation and the implication that people who've done bad things are incapable of evolving and growing and thus do not deserve our understanding and compassion, I don't think anything's gonna actually get better. This is not a battle that we win by creating more enemies than allies. The recent successes of Black Lives Matter is a great example of what happens when people channel their anger in productive ways rather than just yelling at people online or trying to get people fired. Hopefully that trend continues. I think that left-wing activists sometimes have a weird relationship with free speech. Some folks pretty openly oppose free speech at this point, which at least they're honest. I'm not one of those people. But this boring idea that people yelling on Twitter are some grave threat to the future of democracy and free speech seems to largely originate from people whose privilege has obscured for them the difference between criticism and censorship. This fear of being silenced by a so-called intolerant society is ridiculously unsupported by reality. People are speaking their minds and creating provocative and controversial media more than they ever have in recent history. It's just that at the same time, more people than ever are able to respond to and directly criticize those ideas and creations, including people from segments of society whose voices have actually been historically silenced. And to me, that's the sign of a society that's becoming more, not less free. But yeah, we should all still probably get over ourselves and show more compassion and understanding to each other, and figure out how to attack systems of inequality in a practical and productive way. You'll never hear me disagree with that. That's just me though. What do you think? Thank you for watching my video. You might have noticed that I have a new logo, and with a new logo, of course, comes new merch. So you can check out my merch at theonejanitor.com/store, including the return of the That's Just Me Though t-shirt, which many people have requested. I also want to let you know that I stream on YouTube every Monday and Friday. If you want to see what I'm like without scripts and edits, you should check that out. We do a variety of things, including painting D&D miniatures, playing games, or just hanging out and chatting. I'll drop a link in the description below if you want to check out some old streams. The best way to keep up with the stream, as well as my videos in general, is to click the notification bell. In order to do that, though, you have to be subscribed to the channel, and I recently discovered that a lot of you watch my videos without being subscribed. So can you do me a solid and click the subscribe button? The YouTube algorithm likes that kind of engagement.